All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori, and we are recording today's session. And obviously, we're going to be talking about negotiating your salary and also how to maximize your 401k. So I am joined once again. This is our last in the series of the graduation boot camp series. So I'm so happy to have Eric Jones with Student Money Management. So Eric, go ahead and introduce yourself real quick.
Hey, I'm Eric. Like Lori said, Director of Student Money Management Center. What we do here is financial literacy and financial planning for you and your individual goals. We are available to you just like career services after you graduate. So if you do have questions about your 401k or anything else about your finances after you graduate, please reach out.
Yeah, and today I think is, one of the most important things when it comes to the job search is how do we make sure we have enough money to pay for all the things we want to do? And we want to make sure that we're exploring careers that have the salaries that we're looking for and thinking about the kind of lifestyle that we're looking for. And part of that comes with the negotiating your salary. So these two topics really go hand in hand, because part of your benefits with an employer, you want to check out, do they have some kind of retirement savings? Because you want to make sure that you will have a nice, nest egg after you retire, so that you can afford, whether it's to travel or if it's even just be able to afford your healthcare costs, whatever it may be. And so I'm going to kick off our session today with our first poll question. And so I'm just wondering, for those of you that have joined us today, which thank you, by the way, for joining us, have any of you ever tried to negotiate your salary? And, if you want, you can even put in the chat if that went well, or if they didn't really want to negotiate, if you wanted to share any of that information. So I will go ahead and end the poll there. Fantastic. So it looks like quite a few have not negotiated your salary, and that's understandable. A lot of times with our entry-level positions, when we're just trying to pay our way through college, we don't always necessarily try to negotiate the salary. Sometimes there is no negotiation. The salary is the salary, and we'll talk about that in a moment too. But for those of you that have negotiated your salary, if you want to put in the chat how that went. Did it go well? Were you able to get a higher salary than what was originally offered? Tanya, which I forgot, I apologize. Tanya is our fabulous co-host today, so she is going to be monitoring the chat. She's our career specialist on the Gainesville campus. So Tanya, is there anything in the chat about how that salary negotiation went?
I do not see anything in the chat right now.
Okay, no problem, no problem.
Yes.
Excellent. And so let's get right into all the really good stuff. So when it comes to negotiating your salary, we also need to think about how much do you even need to make? What is your standard of living? And that's where I oftentimes will refer students to the Student Money Management Center, because a lot of times we just don't even know what we need to make in terms of what does it cost for our rent? What are the utilities going to be? And last week, in our graduation boot camp series, we were talking about, well, if you're going to be moving out of your parents' home, or maybe you're leaving roommates and now you're going to be living on your own, and how does that impact your finances? And some of that we need to start thinking about, well, what is an apartment going to cost on my own? Do I need to buy a car? Am I going to be using public transportation? Am I relocating? Do I all of a sudden now want a pet? Do I need a cat, a dog? What is that lifestyle that you want? And that's where I think Student Money Management really comes into play, because they can work with you in terms of developing a budget, looking at what do things cost, and then thinking about what kind of salary does that need to be. And last week as well, we talked about some of these cost of living calculators where you can look at, okay, if you earn a certain salary and you're going to be going to another location, what kind of salary do you need to make? And this is just one of the many. You can always just do any kind of search for cost of living calculator and kind of get a rough idea of how far that salary will go in a different location. And different location could even be moving from the Gainesville campus down to Atlanta. moving from the Dahlonega campus down to Johns Creek. Those are two different cost of living areas, even though they're just down the road from each other. And so that can really impact what kind of lifestyle you have. And also thinking about, right now, if you go out often, do you want to continue that? Do you want to continue going out to eat? Do you go to the movies? Are you planning for vacations? And so all of these things really come into play when you're thinking about what is my salary and what do I need to make? So when it comes to the actual negotiation, we do want this to be where it is a win between you and your potential employer. It's not where you try to say, oh, company A is offering me 5,000 more. Can you match or beat that? We don't want to make this a competition, because the employer could easily say, well, then go to company A. Yeah, go on. I've got a line of people, and I'm sure you've seen where there are more and more layoffs that are happening. And so that means it's going to be a more competitive market. In fact, I was just on LinkedIn, and I saw that one of our alum just recently got laid off. And so he's asking for help with his job search and all of that. And that's happening across the board in many different sectors. There are, of course, employers still hiring, but now that you have more competition in the job market, you're going to find that it's, shortly after COVID, or I guess during, 2021, it was more of a, job seekers market. We could demand, more remote. We could demand a higher salary. We could demand bonuses, sign-on bonuses and such. Well, now that's starting to shift to where it's more of an employer market. And because there are more candidates in the pool, now we need to say, okay, well, how are we going to negotiate this salary so that you can have that standard of living that you want and need? We need to keep a roof over our head. But we also have to know at times when we can compromise. What is there something that you are willing to compromise on, whether it's the commute, maybe you'll travel farther in order to get the job that has the salary that you want? Are there certain benefits that you're okay if you don't have, because maybe a significant other has the benefits that cover you? So we need to think about what are some of the areas that we can compromise on, and what are some of the things we can't compromise on. And when you are negotiating, you do need to be able to logically explain the value that you bring to that employer and why you should be compensated. So for example, a while back, I had a previous colleague who had relocated to an area, and she took the first job that she could find. It didn't pay very much. And when she was then applying to another position, it was a much higher position. It was the HR director for an entire region, a very high paying position. And the employer was asking for her salary expectations. And of course, it was going to be much more than what she was currently making. And on her fourth interview, she was meeting with the vice president. And the first question out of the gate from the vice president was, why do you need to make so much more money? And really what they wanted to know is, had she done her research? They didn't want to hear, well, I have to have, I want to have, I deserve to have. It was more about, well, this position has this kind of responsibility, and here are my skill sets, my education, my background, what I bring to the table. And once she was able to logically explain why she was asking for that salary, the vice president said, okay, moving on. They just wanted to make sure she had done her homework and really understood why she was asking for what she was asking for. So we do want to usually wait until we are ready to make the deal. Once they've made that offer of employment, that does not always happen. There are times where it might be brought up in the interview, but for the most part, you, the job seeker, do not want to start talking numbers until the employer has offered you the position, or they're the ones bringing up the salary question. Now, there are some instances where, say, there is more legislation now where companies are being made to put some kind of salary range on the job announcement. So that way, you know, if you're wasting your time, they're wasting their time. Some employers are very upfront about their salaries. The majority still are not. And so we do have to still play this game, and we want to wait until the employer has offered us a position. We know they want us. Now we can start talking numbers. And we need to think about, you know, can you walk away from that opportunity? We don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we desperately need the job, and that may happen, but we want to, you know, as best as possible, try to avoid that, because there are times where they're going to be asking, the employer will ask, even on the application, what is your current salary or your salary history? Again, there are some states that have, not Georgia, unfortunately, but there are some states that are putting out legislation that restricts employers from asking about this salary history, because there are certain demographics, certain folks that typically get paid lower. There are certain jobs that typically get paid lower. And especially when you're coming out of college, you may have had a lot of, you know, the retail jobs, the fast food jobs, they tend to not pay a lot. And now all of a sudden you're asking for a large salary, and the employer is like, wait a minute, aren't you used to making $10 an hour? So some states are going away from that because we don't want to continue this cycle of constantly being underpaid. And there are some employers, again, even on the application, they will ask, what are your salary expectations? Now, this is where your research really comes into play. If you're able to put in an application or on a cover letter that you are open to negotiating the salary instead of putting a number, that's always ideal. We want to try to avoid putting numbers out there as best as possible. Now, if you cannot, if you must name a number, again, that's why we want to do research way before the interview, because this could come up in the interview. If someone is not a good interviewer, or they want to just get this out of the way and say, hey, am I wasting your time? Are you wasting my time? Let's talk numbers before we even continue. So this may come up early on. So you want to do your research well in advance so that you have a nice range to give them. And I always say a range is good just because you don't want to give a solid number that's either too high or too low from what their budget is. You definitely don't want to lowball yourself, because then that's going to impact what you can put into your 401k, what you can put into your retirement. That will impact you long term. So we definitely want to try to get as top dollar as possible. So again, thinking about what kind of salary do you need to make to keep the roof over your head, have the standard of living that you want. And we want to make sure that we're looking at opportunities that at least, you know, their lowest number is still above, you know, what you desperately have to make. We don't want to make it where you're just barely making ends meet. That's not where we want to be. We definitely want to be above that, so we have some cushion. But in addition to thinking about the numbers, we want to think about what's important to you in terms of what's on the job. So that takes us actually to our next poll on what do you value in a career besides the salary, or in addition to the salary, right? Again, we want to be able to take a vacation. We want to be able to make our car payments and so forth. But there are some other things that we want to make sure are important as well. In terms of location, that could mean close to home. That could mean in a certain geographic location in terms of another state. Also, you know, what kind of life balance is important to you? Is that even important to you? I once had a coworker that we all said, oh, you know, we want work-life balance. And she was like, I don't care about work-life balance. I want to be challenged at work. That's what's important to me. And of course, some of our team was like, oh, you don't care about work-life balance. The values aren't the same for everyone. So it looks like the majority of you, what's important to you is location, some kind of life balance, followed very closely by salary and benefits. Career growth is also really important, because thinking about, you know, for some industries and for some companies, it may be really small. So there may not be a lot of growth there. which means that could be lack of earning potential. Moving forward in your career and having a challenge on the job. Yes, a lot of times, we don't want to be just doing the same thing all the time. I know for myself, having independence is very important. I don't like a micromanager. And Tanya can speak to this as well. When I worked on the Gainesville campus, our supervisor, Edward, very much lets you do your own work. And I really, really enjoy that because I pretty much want to be left alone. I know what I need to do, and I know directors have to tell me what to do when, there are things to be done. That's perfectly fine. But for the most part, stay out of my business. I know what I'm doing. And that's very important to me. If I have someone that's always like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh my gosh, leave me alone. So those kind of things are really important in terms of what's on the job. And even having a pleasant work environment. I gotta like my coworkers. I see these people more than I see my family. I gotta like where I am, because I'm sure some of you may have experienced where you don't mind the work itself, but your coworkers get on your nerves. And then that makes where you just don't want to go to work. We don't want that. We want to, at least wake up and go, okay, I'm good to go for work. So as we were talking about earlier, when it comes to negotiating your salary, some entry-level positions do not have negotiation. A couple of weeks ago, we had one of our alumni, Kandwani, and she was talking about her experiences with negotiating her salary. And the position that she found, it was actually the fall before she graduated. She graduated, I think, in about 2018. And so in 2017 is when she actually interviewed for her first position right out of college. They flew her up to Virginia. She had an evening of casual networking, and then the next day was all day interviews, and then they offered her the position the following week. So of course we were planning on, okay, how are we going to negotiate the salary? So they offered her the position, they gave her a salary, and we started off with, well, thank you very much. Can we negotiate the entry-level salary? The answer was no. There was no negotiation. However, there were some other benefits that were added to it, career growth, blah, 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 blah. So there was no negotiating, but they had other benefits that they could add to it. But a lot of that really does depend on a variety of factors. What is this position? What is your previous work experience? Again, what value, what skill sets are you bringing to the table? The manager themselves, is this where do you fit within the organization? All of these things are being looked at, as well as what's their budget. A lot of these things have an impact on whether they can negotiate the salary. So one way to start doing some research in advance is through professional associations, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So that gives you a nice range of what some of the salary ranges are. But also just, salary.com, Career One Stop, Glassdoor, and really just talking to your friends if you've got anyone that works there. So Kandwani, with this latest position that she got at BlackRock, she had a friend that was working at BlackRock, and she was like, so what's the salary range for some of the positions that she was looking for? What can she expect? And how can she negotiate for the higher end of the salary range? And so sometimes just even talking to your friends and colleagues, that can really help out as well. So thinking about all the different ways that you can gather this information well in advance. That's what we want to be looking at. And again, understanding that full compensation. There's the salary, there's the work environment, but there could be the retirement package. Are they matching your 401k? And Eric's definitely going to be talking about that. Are there any education benefits? Will they pay for you to get a master's or a doctorate? Are there any bonuses, any kind of flexible schedule? All of these things can be really important, especially when thinking about high gas prices and such. Can you have a flexible schedule where it's more of a hybrid? A lot of places do more of a hybrid schedule. We're allowed here in career services during the school semester to have one day at home And during the summer, we usually can do 2 days at home, which really does help with one, just your peace of mind in terms of, oh, I don't have to rush out of the house, makes for a more calming work environment, and also saves on the gas money. So thinking about that in terms of your salary, if you don't have to pay for parking that week or that day, that saves you some money there as well. And as we talked about last week with our moving on and moving out, relocation, do they help with that? Kondwani's first employer helped with relocation costs up to Virginia. So all of these things are part of that compensation package, in addition to the base salary. So thinking about it in terms of a whole picture here. And so when you are negotiating, you do want to fully understand the entire offer. Go ahead and ask questions. If you don't understand something, make sure you fully understand. You do not want to sign on the dotted line only to realize months or years later, you could have gotten a better deal, or that wasn't really what you were looking for. You do not have to accept the offer on the spot. You can ask for a couple of days to think about it. But make sure that if you say, I'll get back to you in 48 hours, make sure you really do that. And if there are other things to negotiate, you could negotiate things such as any kind of benefits or vacation if the salary can't be budged on. But you don't want to be playing games in terms of, doing a little bit at a time. And again, comparing, oh, I've got another offer over here. Like I said, right now, it's going to start turning into an employer's market. They may go, well, then you can go ahead and go. And you do want to be, confident in that counter offer, but you want to remain neutral during the process. Even though this is an emotional experience, getting a job, the whole job search, it can be very stressful, but we don't want to be like, oh my gosh, I have to have this, because that's going to turn them off right away. We don't want to negotiate in little tiny pieces where, okay, now that we got my salary, now let's talk vacation. Now that we got my vacation, now let's talk 401k. Now that we got the 401k, they're going to get annoyed pretty quick, and we don't want that to happen. And we also want to make sure that we have a good counter offer. We don't want to ask for an extra $100 more. You're just going to look silly, and we don't want that to happen. And the entire process really should be in writing, even if it's through email, even if you're the one initiating it, even at the end of it, whoever offered you the job, whether it was HR or the hiring manager, that's the person you want to be talking to. And you may even need to say at the very end of this whole negotiation process, okay, this is what we've agreed on. And make sure that all of that's in writing so that in case anything changes, you can always go back to that. You do want to stay positive throughout all this. Again, you don't want to say, I have to have, I need to have. Instead, it could be, I had more in mind than what you offered. What can we do? Let's make this a conversation, and you can make it more of an exploratory kind of language. What if we consider? How do you feel about? What are the alternatives? So using that kind of language makes it more to where it's open to conversation and not so much of a competition where it seems like, oh, we got to be combative here. We don't want that in this whole process. So if you accept the offer, you do want to accept with enthusiasm well before that deadline. Again, accept through the person who had offered you the position. Always send thank you notes throughout the whole process. You want to make sure that you thank everyone, whether it was a hiring manager, the recruiter, a colleague who told you about the opportunity. Make sure you have all of that, all those thank yous there. Now, if you do have to decline the offer, again, you want to explain why, but you also want to do so very graciously. Maybe it's just you couldn't come to an agreement, but leave the door open for future possibilities. You never know, their budget may change. You never know what can happen. And if anything else, if you want to apply to a position again in the future, at least you left the bridge intact and you left everything on a positive note. So now I am going to turn this over to Eric, because now he's going to be talking about, okay, we've got the job, we got the salary. Now we need to know how to really maximize that 401k so that you actually have a really good retirement fund built up.
Because everybody wants to work forever, right? And I know it's kind of odd timing. You're getting the job, you just accepted the offer right out of college. You should be thrilled about that and not thinking about retirement. But if you concentrate only on work and don't start contributing to all of these benefits that you're getting through the company, you're doing yourself a disservice. So we want to talk a little bit about a 401k, how it works, and what the consequences are or the benefits are of starting early or starting late. So what is a 401k? Before I say this, let me ask, I'm sure there's some of you out there who already have a 401k, either through a part-time job or through their previous employer. I'm not going to ask you to self-identify, but for those of you who don't, you may not know that the 401k is yours. You can take it with you from job to job. There are certain vesting periods to where the employer part may not travel with you, but that would be a short-term hiring situation to where you're not with the company very long. So keep in mind that this is yours. So it's important to know what is your responsibility within it. So what is a 401k? It's an employer-sponsored savings plan. So you are going to be evaluating employers based upon, in part, what their 401k looks like. It could be a decision that influences whether or not you leave. If there's a substantially better 401k plan with company A rather than the company you're with now, then you may choose to leave for the same salary because the benefit package is that much better. So it is an employer-sponsored savings plan to which the employer generally contributes money to your plan as well. If we could have the next slide. Any of you who have done a little homework on 401ks, watched some YouTube videos, seen some informational packets somewhere, you may hear the term free money, that the 401k, your employer's match, is free money. And while it may be as close to free money as you're ever going to get in your lifetime, it is not free money. You're working for it. It's part of your benefits package. It's something you should evaluate. So any money that your employer puts in there is money that you should be considered to having earned yourself. So parts of the 401k. So annual contribution limits, these change based on inflation usually. This year, it's up to $20,000, $500 that you can put on. Your employer, whatever they match, goes on top of that. Next year, due to inflation, it's going to raise up to $22,500. So in just a couple of months, that's going to change. Your employer generally contributes additional money to your plan based upon how much you put in. We're going to go over that part later. Tax-free contributions and tax-deferred investment growth. So if you are in a traditional 401k plan, not a Roth 401k plan, your money is going to be deducted from your paycheck before you pay taxes on it. So this investment is tax-free, at least until you withdraw the money. You can access the money when you are 59 and a half or older, but 59 and a half is as soon as you can access this money without paying a penalty, 10% generally being the penalty. Why do you want your money to grow tax-free? Well, hopefully, while you're in your peak earning years, you're making more money than you'll need to draw from in retirement. So that puts you in a lower tax bracket when you're pulling that money out. Hopefully your house is paid for at that point. Your kids are all through college. You're not actually needing these large bills to be paid. So you can take out less money and still live a better lifestyle. And the whole point of investment growth and paying taxes on investments is to pay as little as possible. That's the difference between an IRA and a Roth IRA. That's the difference between an IRA, or a 401k, and a Roth 401k. Roth is just a term attached to these tax-deferred plans that determines when you pay the money. If you've got a Roth plan, you pay taxes first, and you have tax-free distribution when you retire. If you have a traditional plan, you contribute tax-free and you pay taxes when you take it out. So, and with the 401k, you can have some early access to your money in emergencies or other situations, but it's generally not a good idea. So how it works. Your employer has the 401k plan set up, and when you are hired, you have an account created for you. You have the option to opt in during your open enrollments period or when you are hired, and you set a defined percentage that is deducted from your paycheck and placed in that account per paycheck period. Your employer will match a percentage of your contribution and deposit that into your account after a period of time with the company. The vesting period is what this is called. The employer contribution is yours to take with you to your next job. This is called rolling over your 401k. And once you are vested, all of your employer's funds that they put in to contribute towards your retirement can go with you. So that's why some people look at it as free money. It's not. Remember, you're working for your benefits here. Once you reach 59 and a half, you may begin to withdraw the money penalty free. You are required to take out minimum distributions at 70 and 1/2. Why? Basically, think of it this way. The government wants tax money, and if you hadn't been paying taxes on it, they want their part. There is a minimum amount that you have to take out annually at 70 and a half, but it can still grow while you are in retirement. It really should. Any withdrawals before 59 and a half are subject to taxes and penalties, as you see there. So now, if you don't mind, Lori, I'd like to share. Can everybody see this screen? Once again, another online calculator, and we're going to use it this time not to plan our retirement, but to explain the plan. So in these areas, right now, you're going to be contributing 10% of your annual salary to your 401k. So remember, you can contribute in 2022 up to a little over $20,000. If you look at your annual salary here, it's $50,000. So 10% of that, you're contributing $5,000 a year to your 401k. So you got a lot of room to wiggle there if you can find a lifestyle that lets you put more money in there. For this example, we're going to say you don't get a raise for the rest of your life and you stay with the same company for your entire employment. Now, you're going to get a raise. Don't worry about that. And you'll probably change jobs once or twice. But we want to see the effects of interest rates and time. So we're going to hold all that static for now. We're going to start you at 22. We're going to say you want to retire in 40 years at age 62. We're going to start with a starting balance of $1,000 just because we have to have a number in here. And right now we're targeting an annual rate of return of around 4%, which is a very safe return on investment. You shouldn't lose a whole lot of funds based on market conditions with a 4% return. Now we get to the employer match. So in this case, your employer is matching 50% of all funds up to a total of 10% of your annual income. So as we stated, 10% of $50,000 is $5,000. So your employer will put dollar for dollar up until it reaches 50% of $5,000 or $2,500. So they're going to match half of all the funds you're putting in. So when we know we can put $20,500 in this year, you're leaving money on the table in this example, right? Because your employer is going to match up to 10% of your entire income. So they're only putting in half of what they're willing to put in this condition. If this number is 100%, now you are maxing out what they're willing to put in. You're putting in 10%, they're matching all the way up to 10%. Does that make sense to everyone? Please stop me with questions along the way. This can get a little interesting. Drop this back down to 50%. And who here, I want to see in the chat. I actually want to see in the chat. And who thinks they can afford to retire on $732,000? I should have had a poll set up for this, Lori. So I can't actually read the chat while I'm presenting, but are we getting some yeses?
Like most people are saying no.
Okay.
Nope.
If I,
Oh, sorry, Tanya.
Nope.
now that depends on what kind of lifestyle you want to lead and where you want to live, what you want to do in retirement, and what bills you have in retirement. Because if you've got $732,000 in your 401k and that's allowed to grow with you taking out distributions of maybe $30,000 or $40,000 a year, you may be able to retire on $700,000. But if you want to travel the world for the next 20, 30, 40 years, maybe you can't. All right. So that's an it depends question. You're getting close to being able to retire here and be comfortable that the fact that your money's not going to run out when you're 92 and you have to go work at McDonald's. But you're not sure of that, right? So let's talk a little bit about annual rate of return. Can anybody here put in the chat if they know what the annual rate of return is in the stock market over the last 100 years? Is it 7%? Is it 8, 9, 10, 12, 15, 20?
Of 8 to 12%, 7%, 7 to 14%. About 7 to 14, 7 to 12%.
So you all are, I was looking for 1%. So you're all hedging your bets. That's always a good thing to do. Over the last 100 years, the annual return on the stock market, and we all know it goes up and down constantly, right? But if you look out long enough, that line gets pretty flat. 10% return is what the stock market averages year to year, based on how long you've got to be in it. Now, why would you want to be at 4% and not shoot for 10%? Well, if you're getting closer to retirement, you may want to scale back. If you're looking at, hey, remember, you can change this during open enrollment each year. If you've got $2 million, $3 million in your 401k, you don't want to be nearly as risky if you know that you're going to be able to comfortably retire on that money. So you'll want to scale back that risk. Some of you may have heard, and I do actually believe in this, that you can be riskier when you're starting off your career. Why? Well, if you hit some really good years in the stock market during the first 5 or 6 years of your career, you can scale it back and feel safer earlier and not have to take as many chances as you're getting closer to retirement. How many of you know exactly what you want to do in retirement right now? Probably very few of you, but that doesn't mean that you don't want to have as much money as possible to make that decision, right? Once again, 92, McDonald's, probably a bad time to be there. So let's take a look at a little up in risk here. So $732,000 after 40 years. What if we shoot for 7%, which is still below the annual rate of return of the stock market? Are we getting closer to retirement now? Who here thinks they can retire on $1.5 million? We should have that hand raise function, right? I'm not going to stop.
Yes, maybe. No,
No, somebody wants to live in Bali, right?
likely.
Right. And remember, this is a static example. Your annual salary increase is 0 at this point in time. But the point is to take a look at these returns. If you're starting off and you're like, hey, let's shoot for 10%. Let's shoot for 10% early, see what happens. And if that is held static, can you retire on $3.5 million?
Okay.
Should have had multiple polls set up.
Okay, I hope so.
Right?
Please.
So if you're just taking out 10%, if you're just taking out 10% a year there,
All right.
and then hoping to earn money on what's left over, you know, a quick calculation says in retirement, are you going to need $350,000 a year? I hope not.
I'll get a lake house, yeah.
You can get your lake house, I promise. So anyway, this is at the market rate of return. If you wanted to start off earlier in your career, maybe shoot for 12% for a few years. If that held steady, I mean, anybody that thinks they can't retire on $6 million needs to come down here and tell me what kind of lifestyle they want to live and let me talk to you for a little while. May change your mind, I'm not sure. But let's back this back down to say an annual return of 7%. So now you're at $1.5 million, right? You're starting at age 22 and you want to retire at 62, right? I feel like I'm pretty confident, and remember that our money grows over time, that if you start at 7% now and move with the market, get some annual raises, this is going to be well over 1.5. Let's just call it the 10% return of 3.5, okay? As we factor in wage growth and other things throughout time. Now, let's throw in a little scenario here. You're all about to graduate, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be here, or you're at least seeing graduation at the end of the tunnel. So you get out there and you start, and oh, I don't know that anybody wants to volunteer this information, but who here feels like they have the worst car currently sitting in the parking lot and just can't wait to get something that at least is reliable and shows that, hey, I've made it, I've got that job, I got my degree, I'm working now, don't have to buy something super flashy, but I deserve it. I should buy a new car. If you're one of these people, I'm not going to make anybody tell me that they're driving a 1982 Chevette, but if you're one of these people, you're like, hey, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that new car. I need something reliable. I feel like I deserve something that's nice enough to make me feel like I've made it. And I have to commute not have to worry about my commute every single day. And you probably shouldn't. So you decide what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait to start that 401k for a few years. I'm going to be really aggressive about paying off my car. And then I'll start contributing to my 401k once the car is completely paid off. Okay. So in this hypothetical, let's say that you designate $50,000 to pay for the car and you plan to pay 3 years and have it completely paid off. Okay. Everybody got that? So in this case, we're not starting at age 22. We wait until age 23 so that we can pay for our $50,000 car. Everybody got that? So here is how much your $50,000 car actually costs. Want to see it again? Here's waiting 3 years to start your 401k. You lost almost $1 million on your $50,000 car. So while the employer match is important, the annual rate of return is certainly important. Don't get me wrong, but you cannot go back and make 3 years back. You didn't start and you lost that compound growth of this investment type. So this is generally when somebody is sitting in my office starts popping off with a ton of questions. If you do have questions about this and you want to do some more what if and get some more understanding of the 401k, I would certainly encourage you to book an appointment, come see me. And as we said before, if you have questions while you're in your career, please email me and we'll set up a virtual appointment to talk about it. Hopefully that was a little bit eye-opening and you got the basics down. So if we could move to the next slide. Some of the things that you are required to do is during open enrollment period, you have control over which of these risk levels you're willing to assume. You guys are business majors. I'm sure you've all heard the term, the risk return trade-off. If something is going to have a lot more risk, it needs to have a lot more potential return. So that's where we're talking about putting this in the aggressive fund. Now, aggressive may be shooting for anywhere between 12 and 17%. That's pretty aggressive, right? But if you get lucky, you may get to retire at 59.5 as opposed to 62, so on and so forth. And as you scale back down towards conservative, we're looking at allocations that are more in bonds and cash equivalents than we are in actual stocks, which are much more volatile than bonds. But because they're more volatile and they're more risky, there needs to be more return associated with those things. And the market tends to identify that pretty well, as long as you got somebody that's paying attention. Slide, please. So what's an IRA? What's 401k? Well, the IRA is a self-directed retirement fund, and you can get a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA. Remember, the term Roth just designates when you're going to pay taxes. With a Roth, we pay taxes up front. With the traditional, we pay taxes on the back end. Okay, so which of these makes more sense? Well, it depends on where you are right now, what your salary is right now, and what it will be in retirement or what you're projected to be in retirement. So in your 20s, maybe a Roth makes sense to you. If your employer has a Roth 401k, perhaps you open up one of those and then you transition to a traditional. At a point in the future, keeping your Roth 401k open, not rolling it over, because when you do roll that over, you pay taxes. So be aware that you can have multiple accounts open of any of these. Hugo apparently made a good point. I can't wait to see it. But they both have potential investment growth. They both build your wealth, and there are tax advantages regardless of whether you're paying a Roth, an IRA, or a 401k. So slide. And there, once again, is how you contact all of us. So hope that was helpful.
Hugo says time plus compounding interest. Yeah, it's important.
As we saw between 22 and 25, right? So,
And does anyone have any questions regarding anything that we covered? I know that was a lot of information, but all good stuff, that's for sure. And thank you so much, Eric. It's amazing to see the difference what just 3 little years can make in that investment by putting that in your 401k. It's just absolutely astounding, because you wouldn't think that just 3 years would be $1 million. It's just
So,
wow.
yeah, one of the things I tell students is that one of my missions is to try and get you enough information to where when you make a bad decision, you do it on purpose. We don't want you to have to learn through trial and error like many of us did. So I want to, at least if we're not coming up with a plan, which I'm happy to help with people to actually come up with a plan to achieve success, I want to get you the information so that when you have to make that decision, you're not hearing the stuff for the first time. So
There is a question that, I have a question that says if we expect taxes to go up later, how would this affect our 401k compared to taxing it as we put it in? So that was one of the questions.
well, I will tell you one thing, and as a general rule in life, you should expect taxes to go up.
Mhm.
Benjamin Franklin said 2 things are certain in life: death and taxes. And so when you want to get into specifics like that, I would urge you to come in, because my answer to almost every single specific question about how does this affect me, or what if is always going to start with it depends. It depends on what you want to do. Do I have enough to retire? It depends on what you want to do. Should I back off and pay taxes now or later when I expect taxes to go up? It depends. Where are you going to live? Does your state have state income tax versus only federal income tax? What are you expecting the taxes to go up by? So on and so forth. So we would take a look there. We could what if some scenarios. So while it's not a bad question, it's just not one that I can answer completely right now. So I'd rather you come into the office and ask that question.
Yeah, it's a
Sorry.
great question. No, it's a great question though, and there
It
are
is.
a lot of what ifs that are out there. And yeah, and career services and student money management, we can meet with you in person, we can meet with you online, whatever works best for you. You've got our websites there where you can make an appointment. And so I do have just one last poll. It's a 2-parter. So before this career chat, how confident were you with this information? And after the chat, how confident are you now that you have some more information in your tool belt? And like I said, I know it's a lot, but that's why it's great to meet with us individually. There are a lot of variables that come into play, whether it's negotiating your salary, whether it's trying to figure out how am I going to save, where am I going to live, how much is this going to cost. There's just so many factors that come into play. And some of that also just kind of depends on what are your personal career goals, what are your financial goals, and what kind of lifestyle do you want to lead and have set out for yourself. And that's going to be different for everybody. There are some folks that, like Eric said, travel the world, and I would be happy with $3 million at retirement. I could do just fine on that. But I thought it was interesting that some people said nope. So I'm like, what are you planning on doing? Maybe the healthcare costs are probably what it's going to be,
Yeah, really.
Well, I will say this, that while I'm seeing these answers here, I'm very encouraged that most of these responses are confident, but I could use additional guidance. And let me let you know that as far as the 401k is involved, most companies are going to have someone outside the company manage the 401k for them, which will allow you a resource to reach out if you do have questions about your particular 401k and where you may want to be based on how their returns have been historically. So there will be future guidance for you. Once again, the point of this, from my perspective anyway, was to get you enough information to know what you don't know and know when you need to ask a question as opposed to not. And once again, if you want some more individual instruction, I'm happy to meet with any of you.
Yeah, fantastic. And for those of you that are business students who are needing PROS credit, again, just make sure you have your first and last name in the chat if you haven't given that to Tanya already. Thank you, Tanya, for writing all of that down. For those of you that have only your first name on your profile, if you've got your first and last name Zoom tracks that registration, so you don't have to worry about that. And then, of course, we'll be sending the roster over to the lovely Michelle Ruby, and she'll be making sure that you get your pros credit. So I will go ahead and stop recording.